I mean, my influences are people like, Coppola, Scorsese, Terrence Malick, all of those indie filmmakers in America in the 70s. It ended up being a much more powerful and influential film in a way than I ever thought it would. I think things have changed. I think people talk about it a lot more. They didn't then. And I think people aren't so afraid to speak up, which they were at the time. I'm not saying that it's still not going on and that we're still not discovering, that abuse in those people, because there's still people coming forward that, for many years just didn't feel they could, because their families are, for whatever, frightened, afraid, worried about, the kind of lashback from it. And so really as artists, it's sometimes our responsibility to kind of bring those stories to the fore and bring them out and say, this is it. And maybe it helped some people. That then breeds sort of more abuse and more secrecy and all of that stuff that goes on, right up to, the highest of the high in those religious orders. The Catholic Church was quite tough on women, what we could do, what we weren't allowed to do. You think of those young women sent to those institutions, their babies taken away, sold to America.
What's the biggest difference between TV directing and feature film directing?
So at the end of a scene, if Ethan Hawke wants to open up that door, he walks out into the landscape. I mean, I know there were some things I didn't get, in television I'm talking about, because I was, because I was female and thought, we'll give it to a guy. I remember one of the very first interviews I went to for a television film at the BBC. I get there, and there's a desk inside this, and and then there's a door and there's an office. There was nobody at the desk, and so I walked in and I knocked on the other door, and this male voice said, "Yes, come in." And I looked in. He said, "No, darling, the interview's for Alice in Wonderland or down the corridor." I said, "Okay, thank you," and I walked out. And then I thought, actually, I've got to go back in because this is the producer I'm supposed to be meeting. And I knock on the door again. I said, "No, I'm Aisling."
Yeah.
And they go, "Oh, sorry," and you come. As a, female on set, you wouldn't have a problem standing up now and saying, "Guys, stop, that's enough,"
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Tamp Podcast. I am very honoured to bring you a conversation with one of Ireland's most celebrated filmmakers. She is a director and a screenwriter whose work has been described as unflinching, deeply human, and beautifully honest. Over the past 4 decades, she's created powerful stories that have left a lasting mark on both film and television. From her early features like Song for a Raggy Boy to award-winning television dramas such as Room at the Top and Elizabeth is Missing. Perhaps most widely known for her 2016 film Maudie, starring Sally Hawkins and Ethan Hawke, she brought to life the extraordinary story of Canadian folk artist Maud Lewis. The film went on to win international acclaim, earning her an Irish Film and Television Award, a Canadian Screen Award, and cementing her reputation as a filmmaker who crafts stories with both grit and tenderness. Aisling Walsh, welcome to the Tamp Podcast.
Thank you.
Was my intro correct?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the most recent thing that people might know that's of interest is a limited series I did last year called Miss Austen, from the book by Jill Hornby. But yeah, everything else is...
Well, look, thank you so much for being here. This is my own audiovisual project, and I'm very grateful for your support as everyone who comes here to take part in this. Fun fact for you today, I just found this out. Did you know that today is International Dog Day?
Yes, I did.
I thought I'd catch you with that one. I didn't know. I only found out listened to the radio on the way here.
So I have one of the great things in the morning for me, when I'm not filming because I'm working from home and I'm writing, is to come to Tamp, somewhere between sort of 7:30 and 8:30, and have a coffee. And I bring my dog, a fox terrier called Winter, that everybody
love Winter.
and he loves you, and everybody knows him here. He's been coming since he was 4 weeks old.
It is crazy, that thing with dogs. I said it to you the other day, how they just don't forget. The other thing that's interesting is I don't understand what causes them to bond with someone in the first place, because they choose.
Yeah, they do.
But I think we need to pay tribute to our furry friends. My Simba, as we were saying earlier, he can't be here anymore, unfortunately. But he's still with us. He's just living his golden years at home. So,
But that's what's so great about this place, the people that you meet. Because I never had a dog before Winter, and he's nearly 5. So if you think back, I think I started coming to Tamp during lockdown, because you were able to serve coffees out that little hatch, and you kind of get to know people. And yeah, it's great. You bring your dog and I've got to know so many people coming here.
there's a little secret I tell people. Everyone's going to know this now. We actually prefer dogs to humans. So dogs are very welcome here anytime. We've got a little bowl full of doggy treats. Right, going back to you, I'd like to, can you tell me what it was like growing up in Dublin in the 60s and 70s?
It's a very different place than it is now, We were always at least 10 years, if not more, behind the UK at the time. It was a fantastic place. I left school in 1975 and I went to art school. And that was amazing. But then there was a side to it that was rather bleak and nothing much happening and not much art or music, or you really had to, it really changed in the late 70s and in the early 80s. To get something like a coffee, I was just thinking about it actually before I came in. I remember the very first cappuccino I ever had was in a place called the Coffee Inn in Dublin. It was a really funky little place to go to. It was the only place you could get a decent coffee. Most people drank tea anyway. So it was I remember it as being rather cold and bleak and very wet and, dull, but actually there was great energy about it too, So it had that odd kind of mix. And because I went to a very small art school, everybody knew each other. And I suppose that creativity sort of, spread out. And I came from quite an artistic family anyway. So I had that lovely mix, I didn't come from a religious family. And you always felt that you could kind of strike out and try and find new things and make things happen. The Troubles in the north of Ireland, quite a huge part of my childhood too, or my kind of young teenage years. So there was always the threat of that, and the worry of that too, So it was very different to the London that I came to live in 1980 as a student. And I came for 3 years and I'm still here 45 years later.
You mentioned it's funny because this is something I actually want to bring up later, this kind of bleak landscape. And it always strikes me as really fascinating because it seems like a contradiction, but Irish people are very joyous, very happy people, which completely contradicts the landscape around them, doesn't it? I just find that curious.
There's a real bleak beauty to some of it, and there's a great beauty to a lot of it. But I think a lot of it comes from our storytelling tradition, our music, and that sense of fun, that sense of kind of getting together. It's like, South America, or it's like, Spain. It's very different it's kind of different now, but, people sort of got together even to celebrate after people have died. You know what I mean? It's a kind of celebration of life and that sort of idea that you're sort of lucky to still be kind of carrying on. But the landscape it has that real bleak beauty to it. I think anybody up to sort of my generation, maybe people that sort of, grew up in the 70s and 80s, the Catholic Church was still quite a big influence on people, quite powerful. I come from that generation that sort of started to break that down. It's now very different, much more kind of secular kind of community than than it was then. They had a huge influence on things. I was convent educated, as were, most people. So it had that thing of, you go to art school and you're, kind of discovering all of that creativity. And yet on the other hand, this sort of mass on a Sunday, it's quite an odd thing. But, as I say, I came from a family that you sort of struck out and tried to change things a bit.
Did storytelling play an important role in your childhood?
Yeah. I read a lot. We were told stories, I would have been, as a young child, told stories every night before I went to bed. And so maybe that's what it came from. And also with gatherings, say at Christmas time in particular, there would have been on Christmas night quite a lot of storytelling among the adults. People sat together. Children weren't necessarily excluded, So you would have heard a lot of stories. And people in life told, you'd meet somebody and they'd sort of start to tell you a story about themselves. I travelled a lot as my father was a furniture designer and manufacturer. We'd sort of, the weekends, travel the country. He chose wood from forest to make his, the furniture. And so you'd end up in somebody's kitchen in some, farmhouse, and they'd sort of start to tell stories. It's a very huge part of our tradition as music is, and my family all played music. So there's that as well. So it made sense when, I went to art school to paint, but then I started to make films. It kind of made sense that was the next step, because you're trying to tell stories. You're trying to find stories to tell or shine a light on something that's important to be told,
And art is any form of art is a great platform for that, because interestingly, I think sometimes as an artist, you're far more free to tell the truth than someone who may be, a journalist or representing another platform or organization, because you can literally, express yourself 100% freely. You mentioned painting. You initially studied painting. Do you think that has influenced your perspective, and in particular, the way you frame shots?
Yeah, I think so. I can't see it myself. People say it a lot. It's the one thing I never had difficulty with. Whereas I know some, people do, some filmmakers, and I'm talking about people who are directing drama, or better with actors, or better, sometimes the look of something, it's very hard for them to kind of find what that is. I'm not saying it's relatively easy for me to do. I enjoy trying to research that and come up with something. And it's usually from a photograph or a painting. I think that's the look of that film. Obviously with Maudie, it was that painter's work. But with Raggy Boy, it was a photograph I found of a young teenage boy in a Russian institution. So, and then you kind of somehow that comes together, but it all comes from my art training,
And what were your early influences in film?
What we would have seen, because there were a lot of films banned in Ireland, in the 60s and 70s. Some things we wouldn't have seen, and we wouldn't have seen necessarily a lot of European film, although if you sort of sought it out, you sort of did. But my influences are people like, Coppola, Scorsese, Terrence Malick, all of those indie filmmakers in America in the 70s. They're the films that I first became aware of and started to kind of watch and understand.
You mentioned Song for a Raggy Boy. It was both brutal and poetic. What drew you to that story of reform schools and systemic abuse?
I had, the year before I made that, I made a film about the women in the Magdalen laundries. These young girls that discovered that they were pregnant and were sent off to these institutions and had their babies there, and the babies were usually taken away from them. And eventually they may have been able to go home or not, depending on their sort of situation. And I grew up with a lady who looked after me. She was like another granny, and she had come from one of those institutions. She had been a child of, single mother.
It's almost like Handmaid's Tale, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. So I would have heard about it from her. And then everybody, I think everybody of my generation and old would know somebody who was in one of those institutions. I met as a young, art student when I was 16. I ended up in this theatre actually helping to paint a backdrop with a couple of other pals in my year. And I met an actor and a writer there who were still great friends. He'd spent a lot of his childhood in one of those institutions. And everybody knew about it, but nobody really, he wrote about it. There's an amazing series, a documentary series made about it. And I read this book and I thought, there's a real chance to kind of bring this story to the world and tell it. And hopefully that might change things. And it took me 10 years to make that film.
Would it be fair to say that you felt some sort of responsibility to tell the story?
Yeah. And you do with anything you do as a director with the films I've made, because you get one chance and that responsibility to get it right and tell the story in the best way that you can that'll have the most powerful effect on people. And sometimes, you don't know. I remember the film, we finished it, and the first festival it went to was a film festival called Sundance in America. And I didn't sit in on that world premiere night, nor did Aidan, the actor, and we came in afterwards and people were standing and I thought, oh Christ, I didn't like it. They're leaving. But no, they were standing because they were so moved by it.
It was so powerful.
Yeah. You don't realise that sometimes when you're just trying to concentrate on getting it right and every little detail and aspect of it right, because you've maybe one chance to tell that story. And it ended up being a much more powerful and influential film in a way than I ever thought it would,
Which is a good thing, because I think the subject of the film is something which is far more spoken about today than it would have been when you were making the film, let alone when the book was written.
Yeah.
Do you think things have changed since then?
I think things have changed. I think people talk about it a lot more. They didn't then.
Do you think the powers that be have eyes upon them now and being held accountable now?
Yes, I do. And I think people aren't so afraid to speak up, which they were at the time. I'm not saying that it's still not going on and that we're still not discovering, that abuse and those people, because there's still people coming forward that, for many years just didn't feel they could because their families are, for whatever, frightened, afraid, worried about, the kind of lashback from it. And so really as artists, it's sometimes our responsibility to kind of bring those stories to the fore and bring them out and say, this is it. And maybe it helped some people.
What I found curious about Song for a Raggy Boy is that it was both unflinching in being truthful, but it was also empathetic. That's quite a difficult combination to find, because you could say, right, I'm going to go and make a film and I'm going to absolutely trash this. You didn't do that.
No.
And that's what I found. It's far more delicate. You're walking a much more fine line.
Yeah. And also because, in those institutions, I was educated by the nuns, there were some fantastic teachers, when I think back to, one or two of the teachers I had that were nuns. And so, there were some of them that, were quite cruel and, girls were afraid of and, whatever. And the same in those, much more so in the male institutions, and, but there are within those communities always some great people, But maybe people that didn't have the power to, or feel that they had the voice to stand forward and say, this is going on here, or taking on, the brother, the priest, sort of at the, at the next sort of level to them. And so that then breeds sort of more abuse and more secrecy and all of that stuff that goes on, right up to, the highest of the high in those religious orders. And it's changed a lot for women, I think, also. The Catholic Church was sort of quite sort of tough on women, what we could do, what we weren't allowed to do. You think of those young women sent to those institutions, their babies taken away, sold to America, or
It's horrendous.
farmed out, and their lives were ruined utterly.
It's unforgivable.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of those lives were destroyed, and hopefully that's not happening so much now.
We can only see what we can see, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all of these, without going into other names of big celebrities and politicians, and there's all sorts going on, stuff that comes out years after, decades after. But yeah, we can only hope that we are moving in the right direction, and that people are both being held accountable, but also being spoken up against, and people being less scared to speak up.
I mean, you said something earlier that's interesting. As an artist, you could always feel you can do that where other people can't. I was brought up, actually, my father used to always say, you got to stand up and be counted, so I was never afraid in school to put my hand up and say, no, I don't think that's right. Or, not in a kind of a Walsh way, but in quite sort of quiet, but very sort of solid way. And it sometimes needs those people to do that. I felt I could do it. The film I made the year before that about the women in the laundries, I felt I could do that. I mean, that's what people, when kind of remember, when you kind of think, oh God, actually, yeah, she made that film. It's our responsibility as artists sometimes to do that.
You strike me that you have quite a strong moral compass.
Yeah.
Not everyone has that.
No.
So when we want people to speak up, we want the right people to speak up.
Yeah.
We touched upon this earlier, but and that's what I was going to bring up on tone. Now, I couldn't help but notice, and this is just from my own perspective, both Song for a Raggy Boy and Maudie, there is this tone, this bleak, rugged mood, shall I call it? Is that something you intentionally look to bring to your work, or does it?
I think that's just me. No, you respond to. I respond a lot to the landscape that I'm in. Ireland, obviously, I know very well, and that school, that the location that the film is set in, really, it just speaks to you. You don't have to do very much; it's there, and And with Maudie, because, it is in Newfoundland in Canada, it's a different landscape. It's one I didn't know, when I went out there. I mean, I remember calling one of the producers the first time I went out there and said, listen, we're in the wrong place here. We've got to get out of here. But then you kind of fall in love with it. And there's part of it that's very like Ireland. And you just respond to that, and that ruggedness, and that big sea, really. I grew up by the sea. So maybe I kind of respond to that as well. And I suppose in that film, we were also trying to recreate the landscape of her paintings a little bit. Where we put, where we set her house was, because we built that was important, But I think you just respond to it in the way that you do. It speaks to you or it doesn't, and it kind of spoke to me in the end. A lot.
Before we get into Maudie, I just wanted to ask you about your work on TV as well, because you've done work for The Bill, Fingersmith, Wallander, and more, right? What's the biggest difference between TV directing and feature film directing?
None.
None?
Not for me, no, because people ask me that actually a lot. I don't think I could make the films I've made without the television I've done. And I don't think I could make the television I've made without the films I've done. They kind of, it crosses over. It sometimes on television, let's say one-off film, maybe you don't have the budget that you would on a big movie, but then the movies I've made, they aren't huge budget either. You just get to, work in television, maybe you work a little bit more efficiently. You may not have as much time, but essentially I approach it exactly the same as I do if I'm making a film.
Because it's interesting, TV's changed. I don't know how you see the future of terrestrial television. I say terrestrial, as in the mainstream channels, because it does seem to be moving in a completely digital direction. Platforms where a show like this will be broadcast. However, the big production houses, there now seems to be much more of a blur between feature films and TV series. And we're getting seriously big budget TV series. I mean, some of the stuff that's coming out, I'm sure I'm allowed to say it on here. Some of the Paramount stuff that I'm watching, Yellowstone, Goliath, Land, and I'm just like, television's gone to a whole new level now.
Yeah.
And that's where I can see it's almost indifferent.
Yeah, there was a long time ago, 20 years ago, very much so. It would have been very hard. I've been really lucky, actually. I've managed to cross over and back. Most people don't do that or haven't been able to do that.
Why not?
It's just because you're a television director, then you just directed telly, and, to think of big screen wasn't maybe how people thought you could. How could you do that?
So you think you'd kind of get labeled, pigeonholed almost?
Yeah. But I started making films and I went to telly and then kind of, cross over and back. And so a lot of the things I've done for telly are, single films. So they are like a little movie, maybe made a little bit cheaper, maybe made in less time. But now people are sitting in their houses with their 40-inch TV wanting to have a cinema experience,
And almost it's like we don't want the films to end, because if I think back, I think one of the first TV series that I think really started to enter this game-changing territory was something like The Sopranos.
Yeah.
I mean, that was game-changing television. Because that was essentially a 4-season-long movie.
Yeah. And that's what you get if you do...
4 or 5, I forget how many seasons it was.
That's what you do. You get to make a 3 or 4 hour movie if you do a limited series, or a 6-hour movie. And now, if you look at the great filmmakers that are making television, making a limited series, 4 parts or 6 parts or something, so it's now completely, in the last decade, probably the last 5 years in particular, completely changed. And that's what people want to see in their homes, and I think a lot of it, since COVID, because, we all know we bought into, 5 of the streamers so as we wouldn't run out of things to see. And then people carry that on. And the real challenge now is to get people to go back into the cinema.
I can imagine it's hard, because I'm one myself. I don't remember the last time I went to the cinema. I mean, for me, it takes a huge film to get me into the cinema. I mean, I think a film that I would never miss in the cinema would be a James Bond release, for example.
Yeah.
I would have to watch that in the cinema. Other than that, I can't think of much. There's only one film on my radar right now, which hasn't even been released yet, which is a guaranteed cinema seat for me. And this is, I believe, Scorsese's working on a Mike Tyson biopic with Jamie Foxx as Mike Tyson and Samuel L. Jackson as Don King. And as a boxing fan, and I mean that is for me cinematic. But yeah, I'm guilty of that. For me, it's like I like the comfort of my home. I like that I've got a big TV, and I've got a sound bar, and I've got a sofa.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult to get me into the cinema.
Yeah. Whereas I'm the opposite. I like to sit in that dark room on my own in the afternoon and watch quite some small little European film, that maybe I wouldn't get to see on TV. I still like to do that, you know. I still love that moment the lights go down, the film starts. So, you know, I go to the cinema twice a week at least, maybe more if I can.
I guess you're a regular here
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
Chiswick Cinema.
Yeah, yeah.
Room at the Top won you a BAFTA. How did that recognition make you feel?
You know, it's always, you know, it was lovely. It's always, you know, lovely to, I never thought that would ever happen. I remember when I was at film school here, I was at the National Film School in Beaconsfield, which is why I came to live in this country originally. And I remember the school, the head of the school won a BAFTA while I was a student there for, I mean, he made a huge contribution to the industry. And I remember him being in the canteen with his BAFTA and said, "Do you want to hold it?" And I said, "No, I will hold my own. Thank you very much." So I remember that night. I didn't think I'd win. Didn't think we'd win for that somehow. But all those awards are you know, they're lovely because they're given to you usually by your peers. And it means that, you know, maybe there's something in that movie sort of spoke to them or, you know, whatever. So it's always rather nice, you know. Kind of proud moments sometimes, you know. When I won the Irish Film, you know, Academy Award, again, I won it for Maudie. The room actually stood up that night. I was really kind of moved by it because I don't live there, and you know, you sometimes don't know how you sort of fit into that industry. It's
Or how they
interesting.
view you.
Yeah. So that was nice. And I think one of the loveliest things for me, after I made Maudie, the American Academy invited me to join.
Oh, wow.
And I remember the day the letter came to say, "We'd like you to join." And I thought, wow, that's...
So you're a member?
Yes, I am.
Wow, I didn't know that.
That was sitting in your couch looking at a letter. I thought, wow, at the age of 16, when I started to make films, I never thought that would happen. But, you know, those things are lovely, you know, but then you got to go on and make the next thing. And, you know, they're nice because they recognize the work.
Well, you mentioned Maudie won you awards. I'm curious as to how you first encountered the story because I didn't know of her before I watched the film. And I was really impacted by that film and her story. I thought the acting was sublime because it's very much all about the characters.
Yeah.
Almost with no room for error. So yeah, how did you come across that story?
I remember exactly where I was. I was in Cardiff on a recce for a film I did called Poet in New York about the life of Dylan Thomas. And I was on my own, as in I had gone down and there was somebody from the company down there bringing me around, showing me locations, like a 2-day thing. I was staying the night in a hotel. And my agent had sent me this script. And I didn't know Cardiff that well. Normally I'd go out and about and have a look around. Oh, you know, maybe I'll just sit and have a dinner in the corner of the kind of restaurant and read the script, which is what I did. And I was about 20 pages in. And I thought, you know, and I kept reading. I thought of Sally, because I'd worked with her. And after I finished reading the script, I wrote to my agent and said, "What do I have to do to meet these people? I want to make this film." And sometimes it's as immediate as that. And then, of course, I was on the internet looking. And I had travelled through Canada and been over and back to Canada quite a bit because one of my best friends lived there for a number of years. So the paintings weren't unfamiliar. But then I found pictures of her and I thought, oh my God, this is just, you know, this would be incredible to do. And so in the gap, about 6 weeks later, I mean, I had a call with the producers and I said to them, look, sometimes you're so desperate to do something. And, you know, maybe they're talking to other people, you never know, you know. And I said, look, I've got a gap of 4 days when I finish this film, because we're in Cardiff and then we're going to edit in London. And it'll take the editor 3 or 4 days to kind of get going. I'll actually pay my fare and I'll come out and meet you guys. And we sit in a room And if we like each other and we're all talking the same film, that's great. And if not, that's okay too. So I went out for 4 days and they set up all of these meetings with these financiers and stuff. And that's how we, and I made the film 2 years later.
Do you think there was a part of almost recognizing yourself as an artist that it wanted you
Yeah.
to your potential
Yeah.
alternative life path?
And I always wanted to make a film about an artist, and I developed something for a while, and I thought maybe this is my only chance to do it, and maybe I am the right person to do, because it's always when you don't develop things yourself and they come in like that, you always think, am I the right person? Is there somebody? I've gone back occasionally to people and said, you know what, there's somebody better than me to do this. Not that I wouldn't do well, there's somebody better that'll just get it more than I will. I felt I was really right for that. And I knew Sally would love to do it.
And it was made with love.
Yeah.
Because I think you can only make something to that level with love.
Yeah.
I can't help but notice, I've got my glasses. Is that Frida?
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention this because it came up in my ideas and I was going to write this into my notes. For some reason, whatever reason, I don't know why, Maudie drew my head to links with Frida. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, whether it just happened in my head. But now that you're wearing Frida and we're talking about Maudie, I have to tell you what it made me feel. And I did see a link there. I saw, I don't know what it was. It just came into my head.
It's interesting with female artists' lives, not so much now, but then in those sort of past times. A lot of artists married each other. And the women were incredibly talented, but they never got the chance because, the guy artist took off, like Jackson Pollock. His wife was an amazing artist, Lee Krasner. Frida, Diego Rivera, hugely, she came into her own, obviously, at a point. So the interesting thing with Maudie is she's living with this guy who's no idea of art at all, trying to kind of, practice her art. I think also art can be very simple, that story, that idea that she painted every day. And in the summertime, put her pictures outside and people came and went and paid $10 for them or $15 for them and she was happy.
Well, this is the thing. Well, the relevance to the link that I felt I made internally between Maudie and Frida was actually not to do so much with the art. It was more to do with a female in a male-dominated society with a handicap, kind of saying, fuck you to the system, I'm going to get there anyway.
Yeah.
Those were the links that I made.
Yeah, you're right. They both had that physical struggle, hugely. We've all seen, those photographs of Frida in bed and know what happened to her and the disability she had, as a result of that terrible accident she had as a young woman. And Maudie the same, she was shunned by her family. That's how she ended up in that house at the side of the road where, living with that. And as she got older, I remember the day I found some footage of her, of Maud Lewis, Sunday afternoon. And sometimes you're working away on something, you're also doing research on something else. And I found 30 seconds. You see it at the end of the film, actually.
I was going to say, the very end, there's yeah.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. I wrote to the producer, I said, guys, you guys have been developing this film for 10 years. I found this. We've got to find this film. It's a 30-minute film that the Canadian Broadcasting Company made a series of films about outsider artists. And they thought of her as an outsider artist. But to see her walk and to hear her speak, and I was kind of blown away. I mean, I was in tears. And so that struggle to kind of keep going as an artist, I think, is something that is important to kind of know and understand. Sometimes it's not easy. But look at the joy in those pictures of hers. They're incredibly colourful and happy and joyful. And she lived in this 12-foot by 12-foot shack at the side of the road. No heating, no electricity, no television, no radio, nothing. Happily painting.
It makes me think that I don't know if something like that could happen in today's day and age, because the world is so different.
Yeah.
Or am I just being negative?
No, I think in certain places it probably could. It's very well known, probably one of Ireland's most well-known female artists. She died a couple of years ago. She lived in a little house in one of the remotest places in the west of Ireland. Now, that was by choice. Obviously, that's what she wanted to do, and be on her own and paint. I think you can. I think you can do it. I think that notion of that creativity that's you see in those parts of America where no one's classically trained, but it's like Grandma Moses. They find something that they can create, and can't stop. It's like writing, or it's like, sewing, or, sculpture, or, whatever it is, making little films. I think I think there are parts of the world where that's probably still going on.
And you've mentioned the house a few times. For anyone who's not seen the film, this house is almost, dare I say, one of the personalities of the film.
It is.
You said, did you have to rebuild that? And what was it based on? How did you research?
So the house that she lived in is 12-foot by 12-foot. It was a little fisherman's
It's a hut
that you'd see at the pier at the side of the sea, where they'd keep all their stuff. And her husband moved it up to that site. And he lived in it. And then, she moved in and painted it over the years. So when she died, she painted every inch of the interior of the house and the exterior.
Are there images of that?
It's an exhibit. The house is actually an exhibit in the Art Museum in Halifax in Nova Scotia. And when she died, some local people thought this is a little artifact, and they enclosed it in a box, and then eventually took it off the site and brought it into the museum, and they had a lot of work to do on it to make it, to try and get it back. It had got quite rotten and damp and so on. So that's there as an exhibit. And so the designer and myself went there, and the public aren't allowed into the house. There's a little kind of perspex door, but they allowed us in. And we photographed every inch of it and then rebuilt it.
But did you have the choice to either use a studio or rebuild it? And so you actively decided to rebuild it as opposed to doing everything in the studio?
Yeah.
And the goal was to make it more authentic?
Yeah, and also because of the weather. I love filming on location. I find, the idea was originally, before I joined the film, there were designs for that house and it was going to be built in a studio. And then I said to the people, why are we doing that? Why don't we find somewhere outside? Then we've got everything. Because also for and you mentioned their performances, for those two actors, and it's easy when you've only, it's much simpler when you've only got two actors. I don't have 10. So at the end of a scene, if Ethan Hawke wants to open up that door, he can. He walks out into the landscape. And I don't have to think, oh, I can't do that because I'm in a studio. And the wind is coming in, and, the rain, the weather, and so much of her world was about that. And that's the way I like to film. Studio, after a week, everybody's sort of hanging around, sitting around drinking coffee, and that energy is sort of, the producers were worried, obviously, because of the weather. I mean, you saw in the film,
it's pretty extreme.
It's a lot of snow at one point.
And how did the actors react to that? I mean, do you think it maybe made their acting, dare I say, more authentic?
Yeah, they loved it, they really loved it because everything worked. You know, that fireplace worked, and you know, she could sit in the window and paint, and it was kind of how it was. They really bought into it. They loved it. And they knew if they walked out the door and off they went, that they were outdoors, you know. And I filmed in the autumn time, so we didn't get snow, and I went back with a very tiny crew and the 2 actors for that snow.
I was going to say, because there were some scenes with snow right outside.
I mean, it's up to, you know, your waist. So it that really brought something to the film as well, I think, you know. Same as in Raggy, that was a location. None of that was studio, you know. Maybe it helps me as a filmmaker, you know.
And you were mentioning about this footage, this documentary footage of Maudie. I'm curious as to what Sally had to work on, to build on, what basis she had, because I mean, she had to essentially learn this person inside out. We're dealing with a real person, not a fictionalized character.
And no one knew her, as in they weren't people that had lots of friends. They were very isolated. So there wasn't anybody you go and talk to, a relative, and say, listen, what was she like? But that footage gave us a guide because we saw her walking, and it was about a year before she died. So we knew that that's where we had to get to.
That was the end point.
Yeah, and then we had to work back, and we had to figure out. There are pictures of her, photographs of her actually as a child and as a teenager. And so we used and then just worked it out, you know. She had a, you know, scoliosis, so she was, you know, very much sort of turned on one side, and she had a limp. And so sometimes as a younger person, when Sally is nervous, that limp is more extreme. You know, like the first time she meets Ethan, and he's walking her back to this bridge where he lives, you can see her limping a little bit more because she's a little bit nervous. So that is the detail, you know, that we went into.
I'm curious about Everett as well, because I mean, what basis did you have to pull from him, or is there a lot of your input into developing his character as well?
There's a little bit of him in that film as well. He speaks, he's interviewed. So we had that. And then we just tried to, you know, then we created it, you know, with not a huge amount of time actually with Ethan, because he was coming off one film straight to me, you know. Sally had a bit more time. He actually had very little time, and it's amazing how quickly he sort of worked to how we worked to kind of get that.
Because I found his character, I find Everett fascinating.
Yeah.
Because you can't hate him, even though he does some things you want to hate.
Yeah.
You kind of love him more than any, even though he's very rough around the edges and kind of makes you cringe. But you're still attracted to him because he's more real than, to be honest, many people around us.
Yeah. And you have to love him in the end because, you know, he ends the film. And so you've got to look at him and think, you know, what would his life have been without her? She really changed, you know, she really enhanced his life. And what would her life have been without him, you know? And he really changes. You know, he becomes something, he becomes a different person. He's a different person by the end of the film. More human, more able to love, actually, and I think is the thing. He found love and is able to love.
That's exactly the word. Now, I saw someone questioned you about, I forget the actual phrase it was, when you find love, you find purpose. A quote that you said.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. It's love, and love gave him the strength.
Yeah.
And her the strength. And created that, and it really is a beautiful story about love in a very real way.
Yeah.
There's is I want to say it's not beautiful because it is beautiful. It's not. I don't know. I can't find the word I'm looking for. It's not polished love.
No, it's not, and it's very simple too. And his purpose by loving her, he has a purpose to go out and get her to paint and sell more fish and, those simple things to kind of make her happy, There's one point in the film where she wants a screen door, fly door, to keep the flies out of the
I remember.
out of the
Where he said no to begin with. You go, no, I'm not getting it.
No. But then she gets it, So they have that fun relationship too, and I suppose it's a look at that. Everybody recognizes something in themselves,
You mentioned earlier, moving on to different projects, about Miss Austen. You've recently finished it, have you? What excites you most about reinterpreting Jane Austen's legacy?
I think, it's, I mean, the producer I wanted to work with and the writer I wanted to work with again, but it's an adaptation of Jill Hornby's book, Miss Austen, that people will know. It's, there's stories all about women and women at that time. She's a fantastic eye on kind of society and the way that world worked. And I wanted to kind of make, again, it's about love, it's about two sisters, Jane Austen and her sister Cassandra Austen, who we don't know very much, don't know a great deal about her. But really, it is that sisterly love that, unless you've maybe experienced it or, you have a sibling. There were two girls in a family of a lot of boys, a lot of brothers. And they really sort of stayed together. I don't think Jane would have survived without Cassandra. And the things she did for her and how she sort of helped her. And that's really what I was interested in, to kind of look at that in that time, but actually try and make it so that a modern audience, particularly young women, look at that and think, oh yeah, I can be that writer in that very male world where, actually her first books don't have her name on them, because women didn't write. And then eventually, she gets her name on her book. So I was really interested, in making something about that and that sort of sisterly love in the world that she sort of existed in, and tried to give it a modern kind of spin in a way that people could identify with. It's quite emotional, the journey that they have together. They could have married equally. Both of them are proposed to at various stages, and they decided not to marry because that was, at the time, one of the only things they thought, well, actually marry a man that has money and you're going to be okay. They decided not to do that. Now, they came from that kind of family where that wasn't necessarily expected. So they were quite unique in that way. And it was just to sort of have a look at that world, that's kind of interesting. Times have changed, very much so. But they survived in that world where that was the norm. They weren't, they were kind of outside of that, which is really interesting.
So I can see a theme of strong women in your work across almost all of them. As a woman in the film industry, how has it changed or not
It's changed a lot.
since your earlier days?
It's changed a lot in the last, decade particularly. I mean, it's interesting because people often ask me that, and I never thought about it actually at all before Me Too, because it's the world you existed in.
As it was.
As it was. I was at art school, there were 20 guys, there were 5 girls. The same at film school, there were 25 girls. You knew that was the world, and you knew you were in a male world, but you were doing your thing, and I never thought I couldn't do it. But you did realize that, you go out on, there were crews that I worked on fairly early on in my career where there might have been, there was me, maybe a makeup person and a script supervisor and costume, and everyone else were guys,
But you didn't fight. You didn't find you had to fight for your right to work. Then
No, I mean, I know there were some things I didn't get, in television. I'm talking about because I was, because I was female. And thought, oh, no, we'll give it to a guy. I remember one of the very first interviews I went to for a television film at the BBC, and I was in my 20s, and the classic donut buildings, I call it, up at White City.
Yeah.
I go in panicking to try and find 568 or whatever the room was, and I get there, and there's a desk inside this, and and then there's a door, and there's an office. There was nobody at the desk, and so I walked in and I knocked on the other door, and this male voice said, "Yes, come in," and I looked in. He said, "No, darling, the interview's for Alice in Wonderland or down the corridor." I said, "Okay, thank you,"
Oh,
and I walked
wow.
out. And then I thought, actually, I've got to go back in because this is the producer I'm supposed to be meeting. And I knock on the door again. I said, "No, I'm Aisling."
Yeah.
And they go, "Oh, sorry," in you come. Because my name at the time, it's different now because there are a lot of Irish names that we've got used to. Written down, it obviously looked
Yeah.
quite male.
Yeah.
And so they thought this guy was going to come in. Anyway, it was me. So there were things like that. But that kind of happened, it happened to everybody.
I get it the other way around. So many times, Dorian, they think it's a female. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Completely the other way around.
So, and then, and then things change. And I think the thing that's changed that's good is, it has settled down, and there isn't, and it happened to young men and women. You're a trainee in the camera department, for example, as a young guy. You probably got, you would have got bullied and stuff. I often remember standing up and saying, "Don't say that to him. He's bringing you your coffee. You're lucky you're getting a coffee." That's all changed. I think that's changed. And people are more aware of it. And actually, as a female on set, you wouldn't have a problem standing up now and saying, "Guys, stop. That's enough." Whether I don't think it's changed utterly. But I think it's, because there is still bad behavior of that, I've no doubt. Certainly not in my set, but it's, I'm sure there is, but it's changed a lot. I think, people feel that they're able to speak up. There's a reason we have intimacy coaches, for example, in the same way as we've stuntmen for fights. We now have intimacy coaches if there's a lot of nudity or a lot of sex. And that's good for actors and good for everybody. All of those things have changed.
I think the main thing is to stop the bullies from being bullies.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think as long as humanity exists, there will be bullies. But if we can call them out.
Yeah, and not be afraid to do that.
Yeah.
Because it's an industry, that's freelance. If you're a young runner on a set and somebody bullies you, who do you go to? You're afraid to say that to someone because you might be fired. Well, actually, that's changed now.
Yeah.
And that's good.
With regards to Irish film, do you see much change there? Do you see evolution in the Irish film industry?
It's I was asked to give a talk 2 years ago. It was the 30th anniversary of Screen Ireland, the Irish Film Board, that really keeps our industry going. Government kind of give it money every year. There's a tax incentive and all of those things. I mean, when I started, there wasn't. The reason I came to this country was to go to film school. And everyone said, "Well, what's that?" And so it really has changed. And now to think that all of these, 30 years later, that, there are Irish actors, nominated for Academy Awards and some of the biggest names. And, that is what that investment has done over 30 years, A lot of interesting filmmakers, documentary film animators, some great crews over there. I mean, when I made my first film, when I was in my 20s, there was one crew. That's it. Now there's, so it really it also has, it's become an industry, and it's become an industry that people can earn a really good living in. That didn't exist before,
With regards to earning a good living, what would your advice be to young filmmakers who want to focus on more human stories than chasing kind of spectacle and what have you? Because I ask because I think it's almost as if we can associate in art, as in doing art for art's sake, it gives less of a financial return than chasing spectacle.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose what I would say is don't be afraid to go and pack shelves in a supermarket at night, quite frankly. We've all done those jobs where we have to do something else in order to make the film we want to make. That's what I've done. I think there are also, if you're doing something, and there's nothing wrong with doing something for money at all, know that that's why you're doing it. I have a very dear friend, he'll always say, know why you're standing in the field with the 65 people. Are you there because you need to earn the money? Are you there because you want to be with these people and it's an interesting story? Or are you there because, you really, really want to be with these people and tell the story? There's nothing wrong with that. But I think there are a lot of people drop out of the industry, because they either chase that and it doesn't happen, or it just takes too long to kind of get into that world. You've got to really keep at it. And every time you finish a film, think, well, that's going to be it. I'm not, I may never make another film. And so the films that you make are really important because it may well be the last one, or maybe the last thing that you do, and find something else, that kind of keeps your creativity going. I mean, I'm lucky I can write. And so I do that quite a lot of the time. Not that kind of, earns you a living, but that is, I don't live a hugely extravagant lifestyle. So if I do something that, money has to last you a long time, or some of that money you might use to buy the rights of a book that you're interested in adapting, or whatever it is, And the other way is to chase it and go out to LA and
burn out.
Lose yourself with everybody else, and that never really appealed to me.
When you look back at your career, do you feel more like a director who paints with images or a painter who tells story with film?
Wow. Gosh, I mean, both in a way. I feel as though I think I'm a storyteller that tells stories through images more than anything else. And, there's something with painting that somehow was never enough for me, which is why I started to make films, because every shot or everything is an image that you're kind of painting in a way. It's also, painting is very solitary. Writing is very solitary. I like that, but I also like to be with other people. So I get the best of both worlds. I get to be with a crew of 80 people sometimes, 60 people, whatever it is. So you get to have that great time with those people who are also on the journey with you to kind of, make your film. And, you can't make a film on your own either.
No way.
And that's why you have the same designer, production designer, designed Raggy Boy, designed Maudie, designed Miss Austen. So you find those people that you want to work with again and again. And that's the collaboration that I love,
Every successful person I've spoken to has always spoken about the importance of the team around them, because you can't do it alone.
And they miss out, sometimes on the other end of it, because they're like, a cinematographer, they go off to do something else. So by the time your film comes out, they're filming something else, or, the production designer's doing something, costume designer's doing something else. But you really can't. They buy into your vision of something and actually enhance it and have their own ideas and their own. I couldn't, I would never have made those two films without and then you've got actors, how would I have made that film without Sally? She's who I first thought of when I read the script. And I sent her, because we'd worked together, I said, I texted her and said, listen, I'm going to send you 3 pictures. Just say yes or no. I sent her a picture of Maud Lewis, black and white photograph of her as that old lady, and I sent her 2 of her paintings. She wrote back and said yes, and then you're off.
But that's beautiful when there are 2 people who generally deep down really want to do something so much. It's bound to be beautiful.
Yeah. And it is like I don't know the other people that you've spoken to, but in my world, it's a bit like a love affair, You spend so much time with these people, like Aidan Quinn and Raggy Boy. I remember the first time I met him, and I remember when he walked away at the end of filming, and kids were in tears. These are kids that have come from tough family background. They killed each other, fought with each other for the first week. So the same with Sally and Ethan. When they left, that's and they're at the other end. To see it, when it is screened at a festival. That they get the applause for that quite rightly too. But a lot of the crew don't, because as I say, they've moved on, and you're right. You kind of write them, take a picture, and say this is what it was, and it's and you never know. Also, it's always amazing night, that first time that a film is screened. Because you never know. Maudie was screened at Telluride, a lovely festival in Colorado, and there were like 50 people he was in what I call the graveyard slot, 10 o'clock at night, everyone gone to bed. The next day, there were queues around the block, So you just never, you never know. All you want is just to speak to a few people, if it kind of changes, or somebody looks at that and kind of goes, actually, I can kind of do that, or relate to that. Then, then your job is sort of done.
Well,
really.
I completely related to Maudie in particular with the subject that you said earlier about the significance and the importance of love in life. I watched that film and I saw 2 people with no love, lost, wandering around, and the insertion of love into their lives illuminated them both. And that's what captivated me. And obviously I make associations of myself, of times when I may or may not have felt love, or and that really resonated with me. I think I think it's a life truth.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and there's a lovely moment in that film where she paints him for the first time. She puts him into her pictures. So that means, she's fallen for him, and she had quite a brutal upbringing, and was, unwanted. It must be very, very hard in life not to be wanted by your family.
It must be horrendous.
But then she found her other family, and it was him.
But that's the special thing about her, and that's where I think the links with Frida come into mind, because there are many people under those circumstances who are not being wanted, who are rejected, who will collapse and break down as a human being. I would probably say maybe that's the majority of people.
Yes, probably.
And that's what's so inspirational about her, is that didn't crush her. Now, if that doesn't crush you, nothing will.
No, I think that's quite true. They're unique in that respect, because I agree. I think most people would have fallen at the first hurdle, or just wouldn't be able to carry on. She'd have lived her life with her family and would have been locked in a room. I'm not saying locked in a room, but, sent off to a room, not really be in the world. And she got to be in the world with him,
You said you like writing, and I know you like books. Are there any books you'd like to adapt?
Lots.
Anything on the horizon? Anything which you'd pick out?
Nothing. I've adapted 2 books actually recently, and one is called The Undertaking. It's by a writer called Audrey McGee, an Irish writer, and it's set in Germany in World War II. and sometimes it's just a story, it's you find something on, and that's the beauty of the internet, you find something that leads you to something else and you think, oh, actually, that little bit of a story, it might be somebody's obituary, God, that's really interesting sort of life, You're always kind of looking for things. So what I do is I cut things out of the newspaper and, keep them in a folder and come back to them, or save things that I find on the internet, and maybe they'll make an interesting, maybe that's a story at some point, But I kind of write what I know. It's much easier to write what you know. And if you don't know somehow that you relate to it, brings you on all. I mean, I received a box of books from Canada, from Newfoundland this morning. And she's a crime writer and she's written 8 novels and she's, so I've started the first one, who knows, yeah. So you're always looking for things. And
Can I ask your thoughts on new channels of media, such as YouTube, where this will be broadcast? Do you see it as a threat to the industry or something which the industry should embrace?
I think we've got to embrace it, I'm watching some very old things on YouTube at the moment, but I think we have to embrace it. I think what all of those platforms, all of those, stream podcasts, all of that is it's just this huge amount of info. I often say to people, it's like an industrial revolution in information. It's great to be able to, if I'm researching something, I try and find a podcast, and listen to other people talking about things, so I think we have to, I've no fear of it at all. What I would love to hope we would hold on to is that we would hold on to cinema.
Yeah.
And whether it's something that people do occasionally, that we keep those dark rooms where people can go and the lights go down and, film comes on. I mean, that is an experience in a way. It's like going to see a band, isn't it? Your favorite, to go and see a movie and sit in the dark.
I don't think cinema will ever be lost. I think my biggest fear with cinema is that it gets swallowed up by huge budget productions seeking only huge financial returns, and that the artists get swallowed up. That's my fear.
Yeah. And that's why European cinema is so important to hold on to. And it is hard. You make a small film and you can't compete with some huge franchise, so you'll only run for 2 weeks and that'll run for however long. And but there is, that's got to kind of level out a bit. I would hope we wouldn't lose that, that we get to see those kind of unique films that we don't get the opportunity to see.
I don't think we are going to lose it because people like you that keep it going.
Yeah,
So thank you.
No, thank you.
If you weren't a filmmaker, what would you be doing?
I think, well, maybe years ago I would have been something else. I loved the law. I'd love to have got into politics.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But it makes sense because then you can not only just criticize the system, but you can actually try and instigate some change in the system, which from what I'm getting...
or bring something, that or worked in the law or something that actually sort of, not saying help people, but, somehow, do that. I mean, if I lived in Ireland, yeah, maybe I would have done that. Also, the era that I grew up in, as I said, the troubles were going on and it was quite we're on endless marches for stuff and, all of that. Maybe I would have done that. In a way, art saved me from getting into trouble.
I can say,
probably.
I can sense you have this fire inside of you.
Yeah.
To kind of fight for what's right.
My grandmother, who I never knew, she died when my father's mother, when he was a teenager, actually. And I discovered when I was 16 or 17 a suitcase in the garage in our house with her uniform and with her medals and a holster with a Luger pistol. And no one had ever really spoken about her, or not really. You know, she'd been dead many years by then. But she was she fought in the War of Independence. She fought in the Civil War. She fought in the Rising. So part of me really connected with that, with her. And maybe, yeah, who knows? I mean, you know, it's interesting. She would have had a really you know, I remember reading her diary and thinking, wow, that's kind of an interesting story. Maybe I would have, you know, but politics would have been maybe the way. Maybe.
What do you hope your work says about you as an artist and a person?
I don't really think about what it says about me.
Should I rephrase it? If you were to leave a legacy as an artist, what would you like that to be?
That I was truthful and honest, and that I shone a light in something that maybe a little corner of the world that actually otherwise a light wouldn't have been shone on. I think of Raggy Boy in particular, and Sinners, the film I made before that really shone a light on something. Not everybody would necessarily have been able to do it. I mean, I had to fight for 10 years to be able to do it, but we did it in the end, the producers and myself. And that for me, you know, it's like if somebody's, you know, and the same with Maudie, shining light in somebody, say, listen, you can be creative in a very simple way, you know. You can sit in your house with a piece of paper, do something. You can write, you can, you know, to expand your kind of horizons, you know. It doesn't have to be, you know, in the greatest sort of studio in the world. You can do something very simple. I mean, that's also, that film is about love for me, you know, when I look at that. And I often say, I mean, involved with a project at the moment, I can't really say much about it, except to say, I said to the producer, and it is about something that's very important. If somebody said to me, you can make one more film, what would it be? It would be this film that I'm hoping to make in the next year or two. So I just honest and just shone a light in something that maybe showed the world something that, you know, that they wouldn't have seen otherwise, and got people talking about something that they wouldn't necessarily have spoken about otherwise, might have been a bit too afraid to. You know, I've had people over the years for a lot of things I've done. You know, you changed my life because I saw that film and I recognized myself, and I could, you know, that's a pretty huge thing.
I think that's beautiful.
You know,
I think it's really beautiful. It's the one to give people courage, give people strength.
And, you know, that you were a decent human being, you know, that's all you can, that you stood up for something when it was required. I mean, that is the way I was brought up, not to be afraid to stand up and be counted. And I still do that. You know, I often say to my two sisters back, and Christ, I'm doing it yet again, you know, we're doing it yet again, you know, but that's okay. You know, and I'm lucky I'm able to do that, you know.
I think it's amazing.
Good.
Aisling Walsh, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this. I found it
great.
Fascinating. I love it. I feel each episode that goes, I feel I'm growing.
Well, I'm glad.
Thank you. If you like this episode, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel.